Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to this Netspar session on presenting, discussing, and sharing tips for young scholars. My name is Matthijs van Dijk. I am the Scientific Director of Netspar, and I'm also a Professor of Financial Markets at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And we started this particular session last year, basically in preparation for the Netspar Pension Day, which will take place in about 2 weeks, or exactly 2 weeks from now. And the Pension Day is an event where a lot of young PhD students, early career researchers present their work. And I think it might be useful for some of you to think hard about how exactly you want to do your presentation, or if you want to, if you're on the program to discuss a paper, or maybe if you're on the program as a session chair, some advice might be helpful. My own experience as a researcher, and I've been in academia for 25 years, is that it takes time and effort to develop the quite important skill of presenting and discussing and sharing. Academic conferences are a bit particular in that way. So hopefully my suggestions are helpful. I also see in the audience some quite experienced presenters, but who knows, they can learn something too. So the program for today is very straightforward. I have 7 tips for presenting academic papers. I have 5 tips for discussing academic papers, and 3 tips for chairing sessions at academic conferences. So as I said, the context of this presentation is the Netspar Pension Day. So some of the particulars, such as the number of minutes you have for a presentation, will be based on the program for the Pension Day. But I would hope that my tips are also useful for other academic or maybe even non-academic conferences. Okay, so what are my 7 tips for presenting academic papers? Well, they all derive from what I view as the main goal that you would have or should have as a presenter of an academic paper at a conference, which in my view is bring across the main message of your paper to this particular audience. And you will see that there's a quite close link between my 7 individual tips and this overall goal. So the first thing that you need to know, of course, if you want to pursue this goal, is the main message you want to convey to the audience. And what is the main message of a paper? Well, it's usually the key finding, I would say, but closely related to that, the contribution. So in the key finding, it should also be clear to the audience what the novelty is, what the innovation is in that paper, in the approach, in the theory, or in the empirics. And what's also quite important is that it's clear that this is a relevant paper, a relevant question to answer in a paper. And then for a purely academic audience, maybe the emphasis should be on the academic relevance. But for the Pension Day in particular, it's a little bit of a mixed audience with academics and practitioners. And overall, even as an academic in general, you might want to think about the relevance for practice of your key finding. So it sounds really obvious, but I still see presentations at academic conferences that are quite meandering and try to basically discuss everything that is in the paper. And then often the main message is kind of lost in the tsunami of information that the presenter is sharing with the audience. So it's really good if you know what your main message is, and the best main message is really a single key point or a single key sentence. Second part of the goal is, of course, to this particular audience, and I would say it's in general wise to think about what the audience is that you can expect for any presentation. At the Pension Day, as I said, it's mainly academic researchers, but also a number of practitioners, usually practitioners with a PhD, so they know about academic research. But for the Pension Day in particular, it's good to know that the audience is going to be very broad. It's going to be stemming from different disciplines, because Netspar is covering a lot of different academic disciplines in terms of research. So traditionally, financial economics or maybe econometrics, but also communication, behavioral sciences, psychology, legal scholars are going to be present, sociologists, some data scientists might be there. So for Netspar conferences in general, you probably want to pitch your presentation in such a way that a broader audience can follow it. So there might be some specialists in your area in the audience. So you probably want to have a few slides that show that you're really on top of this particular literature, but also especially in the introduction and maybe in the conclusion, try to motivate why your research question is relevant for a broader audience. And also, do not pay too much attention to all kind of technical details that might cause you to lose a large part of your audience because they're not in your literature, they're not in your field, and may not be able to follow this. A third tip that I have is to really focus on the big picture. I already alluded to it a few minutes ago, that the tendency of many researchers, including myself, is that they're so excited about their research, they want to share everything. They want to share all results. They want to share their whole literature review, all of their hypotheses, details about the data, about the methodology. But that is usually way too much for an academic conference. So you need to keep in mind that the audience is probably going to see maybe 8 different presentations on that day. It's also a bit tiring. People are also maybe thinking about other things, or they're distracted, or they're a little bit tired. So if the audience walks away with that key main message, even if it's only a single sentence, okay, this paper finds this new result, then you can already be happy. Of course, you need to introduce the topic and you need to say something about the literature and the methodology. But unless it's, for example, a really methodological paper, this is only basically checking the boxes, basically signaling to the audience that you have thought about all of these things, that you're aware of all of these things, and all of the details people are going to forget anyhow. And the people who are really interested can always look at the paper. So, for example, I usually discuss very little related literature in my presentation. My presentation is about my paper. I want to tell the audience what I have done in that paper. And talking about all kind of other papers is really distracting from my main message. So what I usually do is I have a single slide with lots of references and maybe ordered in a particular way so that it's a bit structured, but mainly as a way to signal to the audience, okay, I know this literature, don't worry about it. I've read all of these papers. The people who know the paper say, yeah, okay, yeah, these are the most recent or the most relevant papers, but don't spend too much time talking about other research. Same for the methodology. Unless your key contribution is about the methodology, you need to basically signal that you thought about it, that it makes sense, but skip all of the details, really present methodology in a big picture sense. And then actually the same for the results. If you can, if it's an empirical paper, and if you can present, say, 2 or 3 main analysis, 2 or 3 main tables or figures, that's already a lot to process for the audience in such a short presentation. So really be selective there and do not try to put the entire paper into your presentation. Well, it's kind of obvious, but you need to prepare presentation slides, and that's in most fields common. My main message there is that they need to be clear and preferably a bit appealing. What do I mean with appealing? Well, not too full. This slide is already on the full slide, too many words, and there's going to be 3 more points, so there's going to be even more words. Preferably a bit of graphics, maybe a picture or a graph or a graphical way to sketch your main results rather than a regression table, for example. So make them, pleasant to look at, not too full. But maybe more importantly even is clarity. So my philosophy is that you want to minimize the effort that is required by the audience to follow your story. So be as clear about everything you do as you can, even if it sounds a little dumbish because you're really spelling everything out. Remember, especially for the pension day, you're going to have a broad audience, so people might not know what you know. You probably have been working on your paper for a year or more, so you know everything, but don't assume too much knowledge on behalf of the audience. In particular, I think that clarity is key for tables and figures. So if you show any table or figure, describe first, before going to the results, what's in the table. So say what's in the columns and in the rows, what's on the y-axis, what's on the x-axis, what people should look at. It's quite a common omission from presentation that people start talking about the result right away, and people in the audience haven't had the chance to really understand what they're looking at. And then for tables, yeah, don't show regression tables with 100 different numbers. Or if you do, at least highlight the ones to look at. But I usually show only the coefficient and the t-stat for the coefficient for the main variable of interest that's going to test my hypothesis. And then I say somewhere in the bottom row, okay, I've also included control variables. Details are in the paper. Be mindful of time. So for the pension day, you have 20 minutes as a presenter, and also be mindful of the session chair. So it's quite common for academic conferences, at academic conference for the session chair to signal to you how much time you have, either with a little note or with 5 fingers saying 5 minutes. So you need to keep some kind of eye contact with the session chair. It's really annoying as a session chair if you're trying to signal the amount of time left and the presenter is just ignoring you. So usually you're supposed to nod or something like that, or give some other indication that you've seen the signal. And going over time is really a no-go, I would say, unless you're maybe a Nobel Prize winner. I don't think we have any in the audience today. And even then, it's just rude relative to the audience, to the other presenters, to go over time. So it's much better to stop 2 minutes before your time is up than to go over time. But it's still a struggle for me because I still have a tendency in my enthusiasm to try and put too much in a presentation. So it's just a matter of discipline to correct yourself. That's at least my experience. Then it's nice if you have a certain form of engagement with the audience, especially if you're at the end of a day, people are a little bit tired. You can do this in multiple ways. You could ask the audience a question or maybe let them vote on a certain proposition. That's not too common at academic conferences, but at least try to visually engage by looking at the entire audience, by being a little bit dynamic. Not please don't look at your slides. If possible, not at all. Look at the audience and then maybe occasionally point at your slides. But yeah, really try to, I always try to look at all people in the audience and try to keep them actively engaged just with my eye contact. Then 7th point that is my experience is not very common, but I think it's really important. My advice to you is if the discussant, after the discussant has shared his or her comments with you, my advice is to not respond to the discussant unless you really disagree. So of course, if the discussant strongly criticizes your paper, you should defend it. But mostly, discussants give suggestions for what else you could do, or they have questions about things that were not entirely clear. Well, unless they really, touch upon the core of your paper, and then of course you need to step up and defend your paper. But otherwise, any response to discussion is usually very boring for the audience, and you're missing out the opportunity for other people to ask questions. Your goal is to collect feedback, not to respond to all feedback. You can respond to the discussant in the break or by email. So that's my final tip for presenting. Let's move on to discussions of academic papers. Here, I also have a view on how to do that may not be commonly observed, but it's my opinion, but I strongly feel about this. My view on what the goal is for the discussion of an academic paper is to help the audience assess the contribution, quality, relevance of the paper. You're in front of the entire audience. They have just seen a paper presentation of 20 minutes. It's very hard to judge, the contribution, quality, and relevance of the paper based on those 20 minutes. And a discussant is there to help. So to point out, okay, this is the contribution, this is the relevance, and the quality, of course, you shouldn't grade the quality, but you should give an indication of, okay, is the empirical analysis, for example, done in a sensible way? And if not, what are your suggestions for that? What you see very often is that the discussant is solely focused on the presenter. But you can do that in the break, right? There are 20, 30 other people there. They have no business with you discussing individual points with the presenter. That's not meant for discussion. You can do that in any other way. That's at least my view. The discussion is aimed at the audience, not at the presenting author. Of course, you're also trying to help the presenting author with your comments, but you're presenting your comments to the audience. Then a lot of people, including myself, also as a discussant, have a tendency to do too much. So I would say limit your main comments and also label them as main comments to at most 3. And 3 is already a lot. 1 is also fine. 2 is fine. More than 3 is very hard to digest. And also, yeah, I would say it's fair you also want to be fair a little bit to the presenter and not have like 7 main points. I'm not sure whether you want to present that in the session itself. And then usually there's lots of other comments. There might be typos in there or small suggestions or more detailed comments. My strong advice is to only share that with the presenter after the session by sharing your slides or by talking to that person, but not do that in front of the audience. It's really boring. It doesn't help the audience at all in assessing contribution quality and relevance. So what I usually do myself is I have a few slides with more detailed comments. I just say I have slides with more detailed comments, and then I immediately skip through them, saying that I will share those with the presenter separately. Then, yeah, my personal taste is that it's nice to include some nice encouraging words for the presenter. It's usually not so hard to find them, even if you really quite critical about the paper. The paper it's a bit yeah, how do you say that? Fragile or something like that to present your paper, right? Because you've put a lot of work in it. Usually, most presenters are quite serious about that. At the pension day, many presenters are quite young. That might be their very first paper. About any paper, you can make critical comments, and you shouldn't refrain from that. But it's nice that you also stress the strength of the paper in the current stage. And then it's was to be expected after my previous slide, I guess, but again, be mindful of the time. You have 8 minutes, and also keep eye contact with the session chair. If the session chair is telling you to wrap up, then it's only professional politeness to do that, I would say. Okay, then finally, some of you might be asked to chair a session at an academic conference. It's actually not so easy to do, I find. And the goal here is maybe a little bit more obvious. It's really to guard the time that has been allotted to the presenters and the discussants, and also to the breaks. So the standard practice is really to stick to the time that was allotted. So 20 minutes for presentation, at the pension day, 8 minutes for discussion, 7 minutes for general discussion, so that we can all also end the session in time and people can have their breaks. So my approach is usually to briefly introduce myself. So I usually stand up, face the audience, make eye contact with the audience, tell my name and maybe my affiliation, mention what session we're in, because sometimes people are mistakenly attending this session. So mention the session title. And then before each presentation and before each discussion, I invite the presenter, and I also mention the name, to step forward and to start the presentation. And it's also a bit of your job to make sure, it's really our event manager who takes care of that very well, but to double check that all the slides are already on the laptop or the other device in the room before the session, because it's also a little bit distracting if people bring their USB and just before their presentation still have to find all of that. Then in terms of timekeeping, it's customary to let presenters, discussants know how much time they have. So I usually indicate 5 minutes. I usually do it with my hands, just 5 minutes and 2 minutes. But of course, this is a little bit subjective. It also doesn't matter too much, but you need to give them an indication how much time they still have left. And here comes the tricky part. Not everyone is polite enough to stick to the time. It's quite often that people go over time. And then you need to act. And especially if you're, a relatively junior session chair, it might not be so easy, especially if the presenter is a lot more senior. But still, it's your job to do it. And usually if the presenters or discussants really don't listen to you, you will get support from the audience. And that's also what we see at the pension day. So when they really, so if they go 1 minute over time, yeah, you don't need to be too, dictatorial, so to speak. Okay, there's a little bit of leeway, but if they really go over time, say more than 1 or 2 minutes, I usually stand up as a clear indication, okay, time is really up now. If they still don't stop, then yeah, you will really have to interrupt them. It's not a very pleasant task, but yeah, that's your job as a session chair to say, okay, time is now really over in the interest of the other presenters. We need to continue because otherwise the other presenters have don't get their full allotted time. All right.